Order, please rise for the entrance of His Worship Mayor Michael Fougere.
Good evening, everyone. We'll begin the meeting with a prayer. We beseech thee, Lord, to bestow wisdom upon members of this council in order that their decisions may be founded in justice and prudence. Amen. Please be seated. So before we begin the formal proceedings, I wanted to speak to a moment and recognize a number of people this evening. This is for the Excellence Award for Design, Regina. We have some incredible people in the audience this afternoon who have done a great deal of work for the City of Regina and for its residents. Last year, City Council approved Design Regina, our official community plan. This document will guide the growth of our city over the next 25 years with the intent of reaching a strategic managed increase in population to 300,000 people. But the process for creating the OCP went far beyond the simple vote on the floor of this council. Our staff spent a better part of 4 years researching, consulting, and designing a document that will maximize the potential of our great city. If you've been to this chamber since last December, you've likely heard councilors and staff alike talking extensively about the official community plan. While we're all very pleased and exceedingly proud of the work that was done, it turns out that we're not the only ones who are talking about it. At the end of September, Diana Horlak, our Director of Planning and Acting Executive Director of Planning and Development, attended the Saskatchewan Professional Planner Institute's annual conference. The Institute is a governing body that ensures the proficiency and competency of professional planners. During their award ceremony, she accepted a brand new award, the Excellence in Planning Award, on behalf of the city. This award is meant to recognize the best in professional planning in Saskatchewan. Proposals are evaluated on 7 factors: innovation, transferability, contribution to the profession, public awareness, implementation, sustainability, and overall presentation. What makes this award extra special is the fact that Design Regina was nominated by others in the planning community. Among them was a planner from Weyburn who said, quote, "As a registered professional planner, I am sincerely impressed with this approach and the result. I feel challenged to do a better job after being involved with this project," unquote. The Institute's president, Karen Bolton, is here tonight, and I wanted to take a moment to recognize her and thank her for the Institute for honoring us with this award. So Karen, could you please stand up and be recognized? Now, it's one thing to know that you've done a good job on a piece of work of this importance, but it's another to say your peers stand up and say, this is something truly remarkable. The individuals throughout our administration contributed to the massive effort by creating and perfecting this plan. On behalf of the City Council, I want to thank each and every one of them for their unwavering dedication to creating something that will potentially outlive us all, and true to make Regina a better place to live. In particular, I want to recognize the people who were essential to the process, the core team who worked on Design Regina. I'd ask each and every one of them to stand when I read the names aloud. Diana Horlak, Michael Kocher, Jeff Brown, Sherry Brickland, Loretta Getty, Kevin Cernick, Jennifer Barrett, Courtney Beaubien, Johan Kryan, Jeff Herbach, Gerald Kay, Jill Heidemann, Ben Mario, Janine Deradish, Charlotte Cote, Kelly Scher, Scott Thomas, Don Martin, Jeremy Fenton, and Janice Solomon. Finally, I want to make acknowledgement of the work by Kim Sayre, the project manager for Design Regina. Her co-workers went out of their way to make sure that we knew how valued her contributions were. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the people behind Design Regina. They deserve a good round of applause. So I'd like to ask everyone to please come up in the area through here. We'll get a group picture and present the award to Kim. And Karen, if you could join us as well, please. Karen Bolton. Is there any member of council who would also like to add their voice to this? This is an opportunity to publicly, as you've done in the past, to publicly thank our staff for the work they've done.
Great. Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Design Regina was one of the first things that this council sort of had before us when we started 2 years ago, halfway through our term here next month. And yeah, what an exciting process. It's certainly a big, so many moving parts, but I think, kudos to the team of people for making it happen. I think the process was really good, and we should be proud of the report we have from it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to see people that we see work every day that are so competent being honored by an outside agency. So I was really pleased to see that, and thank you for all the work you do. And it's so wonderful to have it noticed.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Your Worship. I would just want to make a comment about expectations. I think that when we started this process, there was great expectations. Where I found that staff really came through was in their public engagement. All of the many open house meetings that they had, and all the charrettes, all the things that they tried to do to make sure that everybody has a voice, going out to community events. I just was very proud of how staff always handled themselves professionally. We're very lucky to have them with us.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. If there's no other comments, I will look for a motion to confirm the agenda.
So moved.
Councillor Rice, seconder, please. Okay. Councillor Hinks, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. In minutes from the meeting held September 22nd, a motion to adopt.
Your Worship, I'll move. I'll second the minutes. Councillor Hawkins wants to move.
Councillor Hawkins, seconded by Councillor Murray. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we'll move to public notice, bylaws, and related reports. We have CR 12-112, Planning Commission. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. This is a proposed low-rise apartment building, 1551 and 1555 Princess Street. What I'm going to do is just describe the situation to you first and then ask for your concurrence. What we have is a really interesting building and an interesting location in my view. This is right across from the new fire hall. This is just down the way from where we have new ice pads and an indoor soccer facility. This is adjacent to the stadium that is under construction, but also in that area.
Seconder.
Oh, sorry. I'll take
Seconder,
a second.
please, from someone.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Flego, thank you.
Also just down the street is the Pasco Hospital. Also down the street is some new condos and some new commercial development. This is now an area where a young family can move in a one-bedroom, a two-bedroom, or a three-bedroom as part of this development. There is schools within a couple of blocks. There is a brand-new high school, a Scott Shared facility, that we developed 4 blocks from here. I think this is really, really a good development, and the Planning Commission was very happy to see this come forward. We had no issues with this and would like to see you endorse this, please.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Any comments on the report? Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. I share Councillor O'Donnell's praise for this development. The thing that struck me when I noticed it was the care that was taken with the design of the buildings to ensure that it fit in with the other buildings in the neighborhood. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Other comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We go to report 113, and this is development on McClellan Drive. Councillor O'Donnell.
Application for a zoning bylaw amendment, 5302, 5450 McClellan Drive. If I could have a second, I'll speak to this.
Seconder for that. Councillor Hinks.
Thanks very much. This is simply a rezoning of some lots in Harbor Landing. This was posted and notified. We had no issues with this. I really have nothing much to say. It's just a change from DCD housing into joint housing, attached housing. We're good with this.
Comments, questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And report 14-114, and this is a home-based business report. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks again. This is from Planning Commission, amendments to Regina zoning bylaw 9250, home-based business. This is really some changes to wording and so on to make it into a consistent document. And again, in terms of our perusal, we saw no issue with this. It was a matter of cleanup. Thank you.
Any seconder for the report? Councilor Young? Good. Other comments or questions on this report? Housekeeping item. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councilor Burnett, we have 3 bylaws.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I would like to move, seconded by Councillor Bryce, the bylaw number 2014-74, 76, and 78 be introduced and read a first time.
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. Council will now consider 3 amendments to the Regina Zoning Amendment Bylaw as required under the Planning and Development Act 2007. They are 2014-74, respecting the proposed zoning to enable construction of semi-detached housing in Harbor Landing, 2014-76, respecting the proposed zoning to accommodate a 2-story low-rise apartment building with 6 dwelling units on properties located on Princess Street, and 214-78, respecting the regulation and administration of home-based businesses. If there is anyone in the gallery this evening who wishes to address council on any of these proposed amendments, I would ask that you identify yourself at this time and come forward as directed by the mayor. There appears to be no one, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'll call the vote on first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
Through you, Your Honor, I move, seconded by Councillor Murray, the bylaw number 2014-74, 76, and 78 be read a second time.
Any comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell, that council hereby consent to bylaws number 2014-74, 76, and 78 going to third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
And I also move, seconded by Councillor Flegel, that bylaws 2014-74, 76, and 78 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Councilor Burnett. Delegations, bylaws, and related reports. We have a few delegations tonight. D14-85 is Christopher Kaling. If you could come forward. If you could tell us who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions afterwards.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Christopher Miles Kaling. I'm an architect and a resident of Regina since early 2013. I support the initiatives outlined in the official community plan, which include the phasing of outward growth and development for the city of Regina. I urge Council to uphold the recommendations of administration based on the approved interim phasing and financing plan and not make an exception for the Rosewood Park development, which is located within the larger proposed Coopertown neighborhood. And when I speak of the recommendations, I speak of the recommendations at the previous executive committee meeting. When I moved to Regina, I was excited to learn that the city was working on a progressive document that would guide the long-range planning and would guide long-range planning and become the framework for policies that would enable Regina to grow and develop in a sustainable manner. I have come to appreciate the great number of work hours, public sector and private sector, that have been dedicated to this endeavor, including the expertise of some of Canada's top planning firms. I felt empowered as a new resident that I was able to contribute at one of the public consultation sessions held by the city. As a resident, I felt satisfied that this document was created with the vision to maintain and improve the quality of Regina's planned and built environment in a manner that is responsible to all of its residents. I believe that the OCP is a document that city staff, engaged consultants, council, and the residents of the city can be proud of. And in fact, you have just received an award for it today. The interim phasing and financing plan is one of the first steps in the OCP implementation process. As such, decisions made regarding it will establish a precedent. Will council support the interim phasing and finance plan, or will they disregard it? What is the trend that Regina residents should expect as other implementation policies come forward? Per the Leader Post article dated October 2nd, 2014, the Rosewood Park development is presented as being a socially inclusive neighborhood and will include attainable housing. Those are loose terms that need to be defined more clearly. Also, it states that in order to sway the city in its favor, the developers offered to pay for stormwater, drinking water, and pumping station upgrades, as well as other infrastructure improvement costs that might crop up in the future due to the community's needs. It is my understanding that this is a requirement for any new suburban development in Regina. Upholding the interim phasing and financing plan does not mean that this project will never go forward. Instead, it will delay it to ensure that when it is developed, it can function successfully with neighboring contiguous development and won't create an unnecessary financial burden with increased maintenance on underutilized infrastructure. Once again, I urge Council to uphold the recommendations of administration from the previous executive committee and not approve the Rosewood development at this time. I sincerely thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Killing, for your presentation. Other questions of members of Council? Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks. Good evening, Mr. Kelly. I'm going to do something, if the mayor would just allow me a little bit. I want to just make sure that I give you a little chance at background. Can you tell me when you first came to Regina?
In March of in September of 2012.
And what was the occasion that brought you here?
I received an award with my partner for the Morph My City Greenfield Prize.
You will stick to the issue at hand.
No, I just wanted to provide background.
Through Mr. Mayor, sorry, correct me on this is my first time in a Canadian forum.
So, and what was the topic of that? And does any of that relate to what we're talking about today?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the topic was about growth of cities and looking at sustainable growth and various manners to do this, both from a greenfield point of view and from an intensification point of view.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Donnell. Other questions of the delegation? Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery then, and we will consider the next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next delegation, Jim Elliott. Mr. Elliott, if you could identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation as well.
And members of council. In this very chamber, a little over 2 weeks ago, I saw the same individuals complaining that the rules of planning have changed since Harbor Landing and that it's different now for Rosewood Park development proposal before you today. I would also like to acknowledge Councillors O'Donnell and Fraser for voting against this development going forward at this meeting. Now, need I remind, or have to remind this chamber and members of council that it was you who approved the new official community plan on December 16th of 2013. The participants in the Design Regina consultations, the taxpayers of Regina, and this council agreed that we did not want the problems associated with past developments and that new developments would be built better so as to create complete communities. Now, under the official community plan, new neighborhoods will need to be designed, planned, and built as complete communities with a mature mix of housing types, basic transportation infrastructure, including transit, and schools, and the schools be planned so as not to disrupt students as little as possible. People would have access to local grocery stores and other basic commercial spaces for other services needed by the families living in that area. The changes to the planning and zoning bylaw developed through hundreds of hours of your administration and hundreds of individuals from a very diverse and comprehensive list of community players were seen as the best document and planning tool to plan for the future of this city. And again, as was noted, so do other people think that. My first question is, why is there then a proposal for the development today that goes against that very official community plan that we created for this city? The proposal, as it's stated, is not proposing a complete neighborhood. Second question is, why are we proceeding with the development proposal without an approved neighborhood plan? The developer has no specific plans for housing other than some assertions made for some attainable residential proposals, a seniors care facility, a community center, and some soccer and racquetball programming space. proposed area would have a plan in, as I was told, in mid-2015, so delaying things for perhaps 1 year. Now, my third question is, why is this council willfully defying the very plan that they agreed to uphold? When you have a development plan, one says the intentions, one would think, would be that you should follow that plan. And so less than a year after approving the official community plan, you are letting developers jump the queue and not follow the plan. And lastly, my question is, why would this council willfully impose unnecessary costs on other developers who will have to pick up a $5 million shortfall as a result of proceeding with this development now? As stated in the report of your administration, if Rosewood Park does not pay the premium fee of approximately $235,000 per hectare for a 20-hectare development, and the final phasing and financial plan confirms that is the approximate rate, then other developers will need to cover an additional $5 million. Or in other words, other developers will be subsidizing the Rosewood Park land development. And my last question is, have the other developers agreed to this subsidization of Rosewood Park? It's my assertion, as well as your administration's assertion, that this proposal should not proceed at this time, but wait a year or so, not be able to jump the queue as it is now being proposed, and as well not proceed when others are required to wait for the outstanding service agreement, fee policy review, and final phasing and financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott, for your presentation. You got this down right to 5 minutes. Questions of the delegation? There are none. Thank you very much for your presentation. And move on to our last delegation on this report. Pastor Jervin Weeks and your delegation, please come forward. If you identify yourselves, who you represent, you as well have collectively 5 minutes for a presentation, and there may be questions afterwards.
Thank you, Your Worship, councilors, and city staff. My name is Jervin Weeks, lead pastor of Rosewood Park Alliance Church, and I have with me Ryan Kersgaard, our engineer from AE, Jason Petrunier from Planning Alliance, and Cam Enns of New Rock Development. On October 1st, 2014, the Executive Committee recommended that Rosewood Park advance and pay the standard SAF rate, no surcharge. The committee also recommend a number of conditions, including upholding those outlined in Appendix B of the administration's report, with the exception that the final location of the recreation facility be determined as part of the planning process. We believe that this recommendation is an appropriate outcome of the original motion passed by Council on June 23rd, 2014, that posed 4 questions for the further study by the administration as follows. Question 1, is the plan as presented consistent with that of Coopertown? Your administration's report responds very clearly that the Rosewood Park plan would be consistent with the overall neighborhood design. Question 2, what financial implications would this bring to the city of Regina? Your administration's report respond very clearly that the recommendation to not exempt the proponent's land from the approved interim phasing and financing plan would not incur any cost or revenue to the city. Question 3, what financial implications would this bring to other developments? Your administration's report responds very clearly that the recommendation to not exempt the proponent's land from the approved interim phasing and financing plan would not incur any changes to other developments within the city. Question 4, what is the cost of the stormwater development on surrounding lands? Your administration's report responds clearly that if required, the church has indicated a willingness to construct and pay for the section of the proposed stormwater channel that runs within and adjacent to their property as part of their development, without reimbursement by the city from SAFs. Clearly, the church has responded successfully to the 4 outstanding questions, and that the recommendation of the Executive Committee is an appropriate outcome of the special study. Moreover, the special study has ensured that the same standard and criteria have been applied to Rosewood as to the other 3 comparable low-cost greenfield neighborhoods included in the interim phasing and financing plan. In closing, Rosewood Park requests that Council oppose the recommendation of the Executive Committee, which will allow all of us to formally begin the hard work necessary to develop Rosewood lands and provide much-needed attainable housing, rec facilities, continuum of care, and choice in market housing for this city. Thank you for your attention, and we would entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. There are questions. Councillor Murray.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thanks very much, Pastor Weeks, for coming forward. Just a couple of questions for you, and that the $200,000 surcharge that was referenced and that you referenced as well, if you were charged that, would that impede on the affordable and the attainable housing side, the incentives program?
No, it wouldn't, because it's needed anyways, and so that's just part of that infrastructure for the Maple Ridge Lift Station.
Okay, so that $200,000 surcharge is
Oh,
gone.
sorry, the surcharge.
Surcharge,
yes,
yeah.
sorry, I thought you meant on the,
Yep, no,
yes,
that's
the
okay.
200,000 surcharge would, yes,
It would impact
significantly.
it. Okay.
Yes.
And then the second part of the question then goes back to what percentage of there's 20 hectares that we're talking about here, what percentage of that's going to be for the attainable housing and the seniors housing, and what percentage would be market housing? Do we know where that's at, a breakdown on that?
Through the mayor, yes. The attainable housing is about in the first phase. It represents approximately 4 hectares of the 20 hectares. So 20% of the development. So it's about 90 units of the 450 proposed units. I should say a minimum of 90 units.
Sure. And then the seniors percentage?
Well, the percentage for seniors, that's in the continuum of care facilities. So we have over 3 hectares dedicated to the continuum of care facility site, and there's a minimum of 300 beds anticipated for that facility.
And obviously there's takers for those beds. I mean, I'm assuming that there's a reason why we want to go forward on that. Can you just elaborate a little bit on the importance of that as part of the project?
Part of that is that there's needs for beds, and as we're working with our consultants and working towards providing that need, as our city knows, there are something about 1,000 beds that needs to be filled within our long-term care structure here in Regina Qu'Appelle Health Region, and so we are working towards to help fulfill a portion of that.
Okay, so then based on the numbers that are here, I'm thinking it's about 15 hectares would be used then for market rate housing. Is that, am I close on the math? Okay, so that would then subsidize, that market rate housing would subsidize the seniors and the attainable housing, or assist in subsidizing that partially?
Well, yeah, the development as a whole would have to be financially feasible, and so certainly providing the attainable housing and the continuum of care facility, you wouldn't generate the profit that you typically would in a conventional development. So in that sense, yeah, you're spreading the revenues from the development over the whole.
Well, Your Worship, that's all I have. I appreciate thinking outside the box. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Hinks.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. It's too bad we have to go through this all again, but now we're on TV, so we want you to be heard. The attainable housing part is the part that, and one of the delegations before seems to have some doubts about whether we can achieve it. I'd like to talk about New Rock, to talk about what you've achieved in the past and your past projects. This should show that you are the real deal.
Sure. Thank you, through the mayor. New Rock has been in Regina for about 4 years. We've done about 230 units that are built or under construction currently. And we've given back approximately $7.5 million to these families for home ownership. And Regina has been very exciting for New Rock, and we've enjoyed being able to provide this housing. One of the challenges going forward for us is finding land at a reasonable price that will allow us to give back the money that we do in the down payment assistance and monthly payment assistance. So working with Pastor Weeks, we put together some preliminary ideas and numbers on how we might be able to take some of the savings that they want to achieve through attainable housing and give that back to the homeowners. So we're very excited. And frankly, for New Rock, the project we're on right now is the only thing in Regina that we have. So, this project is very important for us to continue to provide attainable housing here in Regina.
Councillor Hinks?
Again, can you talk about how you achieved the low monthly payment and how the down payment has worked and everything, just to demonstrate how you do business?
Sure. Would be pleased to. So New Rock's program consists of a couple different elements. The first thing that we address is the difficulty in folks saving for their down payment. Very often, people are paying such high rents that they can't save the minimum 5% that's required. So New Rock has a part of the plan that's in place provides down payment assistance. So whereas you'd normally need to put down $10,000 to $15,000, with New Rock you're only putting down $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000. So that's the first thing we're doing to address the down payment. The second thing we're doing is when it comes to the price, we're selling our units for $1,000 below appraised value. So even though we're giving some of these funds back, people are sure that they're not getting an overpriced product. So that's very important. We do as-built appraisals before the project starts to set those prices. The third thing we do is to help with the monthly payment. Monthly payment can also be difficult. So we provide anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 in monthly assistance spread out over 7 to 10 years. And this brings the homeowner's payments down immediately. And it's spread out, it depends on the project we're working on, but it's spread out over 7 to 10 years, and it slowly gets the homeowner used to the monthly payment that they might pay at the very end. And what's nice about our program is that money goes into a trust account, and it stays with the home. So if the person is forced to sell the home or upgrade the home in a couple of years, whatever's left goes to the next homeowner. Because our goal is to provide affordable housing and attainable housing, not just for one person, but for anybody who might live in that home over that period of time. And the final thing that it does is because this monthly payment assistance is being recognized by the lenders, it's also bringing down the income requirement. So normally you might have to earn $45,000 or $50,000 to get into a home. That can often come down substantially because of the program. So when you take all those things combined, we have a large waiting list of folks who are trying to get into a New Rock product because of the assistance and the help that we're able to provide. And you've got to remember, too, that this is not a government-approved or sponsored program. These payments and this assistance comes out of New Rock's profits. We always take the same amount of profit wherever we build, and whatever's left is what we try and give back. And with land prices getting more expensive and more difficult, it's getting very hard for us to provide attainable housing in some of the cities, and Regina is becoming one of them. So Rosewood Park and this development will really assist us in getting that product to market.
Thank you. And would you say waiting a year would also affect the price?
Oh, absolutely. Our prices, one of the things we do as well is our prices are always set and they never change, right? So we set it now, and sometimes folks, by the time they move in, the prices have changed. So if we have to wait too much longer, these prices are continue to go up, and makes it much more difficult for us to provide an affordable product, because there's always a level of price that you have to keep at to keep it attainable and affordable.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Maybe a question for Pastor Weeks. When it comes to the senior care facilities that you're talking about, could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things that we realized, and being in a church, you see many people with needs, and one of the things that we realized as a church is that we had members who had to wait 6 to 8 months to get into a long-term care facility, or they had to move somewhere else. I had one couple where they had to, what we call a forced divorce. They had to be separated across the city in order for them to find a place. And so in looking at that, we've said, this has been part of what the church has wanted to do for 30 years, that we're meeting a need right here within the city, that instead of people moving away to provide senior care for them, that we have that property that we can afford to place them in and to build so that they can stay within the city of Regina. They can stay close to their family, their grandkids, and that's part of the reason why we've added that as part of our development.
In looking at your plan, you talk about recreation, of different recreational things. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Also, part of the vision or long-term vision of the church was that they would use their lands to provide a recreation. And 30 years ago, recreation was baseball. And the name of Rosewood Park, the park in there symbolizes that vision, that they wanted that property to be a park-like environment for the community, not for Rosewood Park alone and its members, but for the entire community. And so when you fast forward 30 years ahead and you realize, okay, baseball isn't the predominant sport anymore, that it's soccer, and there's a need, there's a lack of facilities, we asked ourselves the question, is this the direction that we want to go to provide the rec facility? We had conversations and ongoing conversations with the Regina Soccer Association. We've had conversations with the racquetball club here to look at their needs and to find out whether or not if we can house them in a rec facility that is not competitive with the Northwest Leisure Center or the Y within our neighborhood. And in finding that this was a need, according to the City of Regina's 2008 report also, that there is a need for recreation within the city, we pursued and continue to pursue this direction to provide that need as part of our development. And so it's not just for soccer, it's not just for our use. There's there's a racquetball proposed, there are gyms proposed, there's soccer fields for soccer, there's a daycare that's proposed to be part of it. So it's looking at the needs within our community and saying, we want to help provide these needs as citizens of our city, of our community. We want to be able to help with meeting those needs, and that's where that rec came in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hinks. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Thanks for your time tonight and your good work. Just a few questions. I don't think the spirit and intent is really, on question tonight. It's about the time and the place of this development. Has the idea of a land swap ever been floated past you? Has there been any discussion about that?
We don't plan on swapping any lands.
Okay. Given that this neighborhood, I feel like a big, one of the selling points for council here is that it's full of seniors housing, a rec center, and affordable housing. Does the transit issue concern you at all, that there isn't a plan for transit to reach this neighborhood in the immediate future and potentially for a couple decades, actually, for there to be transit to this area? Is that an issue? How do we reconcile that?
Have you been to our area?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a bus that runs right by the church. Paratransit runs to our church every Sunday morning. There's a bus that comes up Courtney and goes down Wayland, and that's where we're at. We're at the corner of Courtney and Wayland. And so the question of whether we're out there in the field, it's not like we are 10 minutes out of the city of Regina. Right across the street from us is Maple Ridge and Lakewood and Lake Ridge. We are within a community neighborhood. And so transit has already been provided by the city of Regina for the residents of Maple Ridge and around us there. So that question or that concern that has been raised several times, I'm not quite sure where it comes from, because I see the bus every day, and I have people who are delivered to Rosewood on a Sunday using paratransit. So unless we're using a different type of transportation in the city of Regina, I'm not quite sure where that came from.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. My question relates to sort of the ongoing operation and management of the three core areas. That I certainly understand on the attainable housing, it's private ownership. And when you look at the continuum of care, is Rosewood going to be involved in the ongoing management, or is that going to be contracted out to a private operator that will run the facilities for you?
Our partner, one of the partners that we have, that's what they specialize in. And so we have surrounded ourselves with people who are well-versed in the areas to provide that care. In the rec facility itself, there would be management from us, from a separate entity, but we would continue with that. But with the long-term care, we have the expertise alongside us to help us making sure that runs smoothly.
So if there was, let's say, a loss in revenue for operating indoor soccer, that would be looked after by Rosewood?
That would be looked after by the entity in general, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Burnett. Councilor Flagel?
Thanks, and welcome back again, of course. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we were told that there's a $200,000 potential cost to upgrade the Maple Ridge. What if that's $500,000?
When we came to Executive Committee in June, we actually thought that that number was $800,000. And we expressed to Executive Committee that we knew that there needed to be upgrades in that area. We later found out that through our engineers who did work for the city on assessing Maple Ridge Lift Station a few years ago, that that cost would be about $200,000 or less. And I'll yield to Ryan, and he could speak to the cost of the Maple Ridge Lift Station.
Through the Mayor, the upgrades that were identified in the 2012 report included pumps, HVAC, electrical, everything that was required to get the station up to standard. It's currently 25 years old and in need of repair. So the upgrades that we're talking about doing, we're going over and above what was asked of or identified in that report to gain additional capacity there.
Okay, good, thanks. There's talk of attainable housing and the seniors and stuff, but what exactly are they buying? And are you allowed to discuss the cost of a unit today? But what, we talk about a 1-level, 2-level, single level, no basement, what is it that these people can buy? Because we've never described the style.
We have a few different styles. The most popular when it comes to price point is we consider it a stacked style where we have a bungalow on the main floor, and then we have two stories on top of that, all with exterior private entrances. We also do have townhouse style that have no stacking on top of them. We also have townhouse style with garage and with basements. Typically, in a more expensive area or an expensive city, we see the stack style would be the most common. It gets the price point to where folks need, to get into their first home.
Okay, thank you. Another question would be, you've talked about the $200,000, and I'm sure there's other costs involved, but what other costs are you going to need to pay towards the city for startup? Is there anything else that maybe we don't know about or haven't heard about, that different access roadways off of Courtney, et cetera, et cetera? Are those extra costs, or are they covered under the agreements, or just?
I think most of the costs we've identified, other than the upgrade to the Maple Ridge Lift Station, are the internal costs of developing the site. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then one other thing is, if this goes forward tonight, shovel in the ground would be when, and occupancy would be when?
Well, as in at the last meeting through the Mayor, at the executive committee 2 weeks ago, we committed to a shovel in the ground of next summer once we can get through the approvals and get the servicing agreement finalized. So that's really the next big hurdle. So as soon as we can get through the approval stage, we'll be on the ground running.
So you're going to have to do roads, you're going to have to do sewers, lines, everything. But when would somebody actually physically be living on that piece of land?
We would have occupancy likely in early 2016.
So if we waited, that would push almost 2 years out?
Yeah.
Again?
Definitely.
So into 2018?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flagel. Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks. Good evening, gentlemen. I always like it when you're prepared. You're doing a good job. First question is a little bit about service agreement fees. It was discussed, but I want to ask you specifically, what is the service agreement fee that you think that, if this passes, that you would pay? What are you expecting to pay?
Well, there's a little bit of confusion in the report that was written,
Yes.
Standard SAF. In June, when we came to Executive Committee, the question was asked of us 4 times, would we be willing to pay the interim servicing and financing, which is $354 or in that range, and we said that we would. And so when that's clarified, and this evening, Diana came to me and just to express the fact that there was some misinterpretation in that, and so that's where we are at.
Thanks very much. One of the things that I heard earlier, and I'll just ask you to respond to, is that the notion of somebody else paying your portion or someone else having to, I'll use a different word, handicap, in other words. So can I get you to respond to that? In other words, if you are allowed to go ahead now, is someone else going to have to pay a different portion of SAFs?
Right. I think the purpose of the interim phasing and financing growth was to identify, one of the purposes was to identify low-cost neighborhoods that could be phased in the interim. The purpose of the special study area was to determine the feasibility of Rosewood and its determination as a low-cost neighborhood. And I think through the work that we've done with the administration, we've identified Rosewood as a low-cost neighborhood similar to the other 300K Greenfield neighborhoods in West Harbour Landing, Westara, and Skyview. So we see ourselves as equal in that mix.
Thank you. I also would like to give you an opportunity to make me clear on, not on the wastewater, but on the storm ponds and so on, and how that would work, and how ultimately that whole notion of handling stormwater would hook into the next development, call it Coopertown or yours or whomever it is. How does that work? I'm looking for assurance more than anything, just by the way.
Through the mayor. Essentially, there's going to be a large drainage ditch or creek constructed all the way from Wascana up to connect with the agricultural ditch. That's the long-term plan. What we're proposing to do is build the upstream section of that creek now and use it as a retention pond. So it will be placed in line with where the ditch will be ultimately. We will use that new volume or storage area as a retention pond, and we will pipe that over across to the existing drainage run. So the current drainage run would be collected into the new ditch area, and we would have about a 450 mil pipe running out to the drainage run.
Okay. So just to carry that on, that would, two questions. Is that consistent with Coopertown? And further to that, there are landowners to the north of you. Is it consistent, or is there even a plan for that?
With regards to it being consistent with the plan, yes, it is consistent with the Coopertown plan. With regards to the landowners to the north, they are aware of the plan. They are in agreement with the plan as we understand it right now. So it seems to be in tune with what they're understanding as well.
Thanks very much. So I have one other question, and it basically is what you're asking for today and where we're going. So you're really asking for permission to go ahead and develop, but at this point in time, despite our discussion on what it may be, we haven't seen a plan, and therefore that is further approval. Am I correct in what I'm asking?
That's right. So the next step would be to submit the neighborhood and the concept plans for approval.
Thanks very much. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Are there other questions of the delegation? I have one, just to be clear, that the soccer facility, the recreation facility, and the seniors facility that is there is meant for use across the city, not just
Yes,
in
it
Rosewood.
is. It's not just for Rosewood members. It is for everyone. It's all-inclusive, everyone across the city.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for answering questions. You can now return to the gallery.
Thank you.
And we'll look for a motion on the Executive Committee report on the Rosewood Park Development Special Study. Councillor Burnett, as Chair of Executive.
I'd like to
Perhaps you get your microphone turned on to Councillor Burnett.
Yes, I'd like to move that item CR 14-115 be placed for discussion, and with the 4 recommendations that have been contained within the document.
Thank you. Need a seconder for that,
I'll
please?
second it.
Councillor Hinks. Speakers to the report. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. As in the past, I rise to support this development. I do so enthusiastically. I do so for 4 reasons. The first is I am persuaded that this is a complete community within the meaning of the official city plan. I'm especially impressed by the provision of both affordable and senior housing and the provision for recreational facilities. And I want to say this, No community is fully developed the day it begins. Communities grow and develop as needs in the community manifest themselves. I'm satisfied that this community will have a head start and will continue to develop as a complete community as it goes along. The second reason I support this is that I don't want to see the seniors in particular and those looking for affordable housing to have to wait an additional 2 years. I see no purpose in that. Thirdly, I'm impressed by Rosewood's ability to pay for all of the upgrades to infrastructure that have been mentioned and to meet all of the conditions that were met, the 4 conditions that were put out by the council last June. And finally, and I suppose in some ways most impressively, I'm impressed by the dedication of Rosewood to this project. The date 1985 has been mentioned. This is a long-standing commitment, and on the basis of that long-standing commitment and the careful planning that's gone into this, I'm persuaded that this is ready to go forward and will be a fine, fine addition to the city of Regina. I support the motion enthusiastically.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just a few questions to start out with. First off, is there any subsidy involved with this neighborhood? If this were to pass tonight as it stands, will there be any subsidy involved to make this neighborhood happen?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, the subsidy that would be taking place is the shortfall for not having the surcharge for the Coopertown area. So that would be, as the report indicates, $5 million would be what the rest of the development community would need to cover. We did say in the report that because Rosewood is upfronting the stormwater for $2 million, that we would take that off the top of the 5, which would be $3 million. So there would be $3 million shortfall that would need to be made up over time by the other developers within the area.
Okay, has the idea of land swap ever been suggested by the city?
Through you, Your Worship, we did have those discussions and as alternatives.
Okay. Final question. If we could just get some clarity on the transit option. I know there was a suggestion that the report maybe wasn't quite right, but if we could just have a comment on if this neighborhood were to go forward, when they would expect to have transit service.
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Mr. Worship, or Your Worship, I'd like to put that to Mr. Looning.
Through you, the Mayor. I'll break it down between the 2 different services. So paratransit service, we would be servicing this area right away. We do that now, as they indicated, on Sundays. However, what would happen here is we would probably see more trips due to the type of housing there. With senior housing, there's going to be more trips out there, but that may impact the amount of unaccommodated trips that paratransit currently has. As far as conventional transit, we don't run on Courtney Street right now. The closest is along Maple Ridge Drive. About 2/3 of the proposed development falls in within our 400-meter walk distance. But again, because of the amount of senior development and attainable housing here, we expect that there's going to be a demand for that type of service. We cannot, unfortunately, just expand the current route that is currently there right now. We do that in other areas of the city where we do have some time on particular routes, like we did with Harper Landing, but we can't do that with this particular route.
So as far as when if this neighborhood were to go forward in the next couple of years, when might it expect to actually have proper bus service?
Mr. Looting?
Through the Mayor. Nothing at this time is foreseeable. It would be an additional expense to the city.
Okay, thanks for that. So first comment is that, we shouldn't knock the good work and good intentions of Rosewood Alliance Church and New Rock. Certainly they've been, they have good standing in our neighborhood. This isn't really what the question is for me. I plan not to support the recommendation of Exec Council for 3 reasons. Number one, I don't think this is a complete neighborhood. We have a new OCP, which we've been recognized for. I think we should be excited about it. It sort of clearly lays out what the expectations are for a complete neighborhood. And at 1,000 people, this just doesn't meet that requirement. For one issue, there won't be any requirement for public green space there. And of course, the transit issue. I feel like part of the selling block for this is that it's going to be full of seniors and affordable housing and recreation facilities. And as mentioned here, there's no foreseeable plan for how it'll be serviced by transit. So that's a big what if to me. Secondly, I think part of the push to make this happen is affordable housing. I think we should all agree that affordable housing is the #1 issue facing the city now and has been for about the past 6 years or so. But also, we have to know this council should be proud of some of the good work we've done around affordable housing. And there's also a lot more good work to do. But affordable housing should not be used as an excuse for development at any cost, in my mind. If we do that, we're just trading one set of problems for another set of problems. And my final concern is, what does this signal about things to come? I mean, if this council is willing to bend for the wants of a developer as it relates to the goals of the OCP in such a blatant way, what happens when we have a phasing and financing report come back to us in the next couple of years? And the goals of that phasing and finance report, which will align with the OCP and maybe won't align with many of the developers in town, why should people have any faith that this council is going to stick to the plan of the OCP and not just bend to the wants of developers? So personally, I'm not going to support this. Again, it's not to comment on the good work of these people before us here tonight. Definitely the affordable housing issue. As mentioned, there'll be about 90 units. The subsidy that will go into creating this neighborhood, $3 million, if we were to put that type of money back into our affordable housing incentives, that would subsidize about 200 more units. So we have to kind of keep things in perspective. And again, it's maybe the right development, but it's not the right time or the right place. And I think we need to be conscious of that and think about what's best for the whole city. And with that in mind, I encourage other people not to support the motion here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you very much. I just want to start by asking the clarification of the SAF rates.
Sure.
What will they be?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, the rates that would be charged would be the 300 population interim rates that were approved by council. So in 2015, the rate would be $359,089 per hectare.
Thank you. I think we as a council have asked Rosewood to meet certain conditions in order for us to even take a look at this. They've actually gone above and beyond what we've asked for and come forward with a really good concept for a community that may not be complete right now, but it's feeding into other communities that will make that area complete. Up in the Northwest, there is a leisure center, there is grocery shopping, there's lots of amenities there already. This is at the corner of Courtney and I want to say Rochdale, right? The bus goes right there. I live up close to this area, so the transit does go. It's not that they don't have any transit at all. It goes very close, right up to the church. So that being an excuse for not moving forward with this doesn't fly with me for sure. I think that we need to do things that we feel as a council is the right thing for our community. And this, I think, is the right thing for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Young and Councillor Flagel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to clarify, Rosewood is part of the 300K, and they will be paying the same SAF as the other 300K without the surcharge. Is that correct?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, that is what was approved by council at exec.
Okay. So are all the other 300K properties paying a surcharge?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, no. When we looked at the Coopertown area specifically, we looked at the requirements for servicing of that area, and it was determined that in order to have that area move forward, a surcharge would need to be established. So it's just for Coopertown as they were moving forward in order to cover those costs.
So then the SAF charges that Rosewood would be paying are the same as the other 300K properties that are now under development?
Ms. Horlock?
Through Your Worship, that's correct.
Okay. And there's been mention of a shortfall of $5 million, but if you take the $2 million out that they're using to create the storm drainage, then that leaves $3 million. And what would that $3 million be needed for, and who will have to pay for that?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, the $3 million accounts for a number of different projects that are within the SAF model, such as upgrades to Courtney, Pinky, the interchange, those sorts of things. So this development, although won't trigger this 1,000 like the small approximate 20 hectares won't trigger those improvements. What it does, though, is it takes that 20 hectares out of getting that money for the future when we do have to do those upgrades. So what it does is it lessens the denominator of number of hectarage that would pay for all of this. So what happens is that shortfall needs to be made up through the other development charges to the other developers in the community.
So would those charges then have to be picked up by Coopertown?
Through you, Your Worship, it would be. It depends on what happens with the interim, the final phasing plan. If it is a universal rate across the city, then it would be picked up by all the development community. If it's an area-specific rate, then it would be picked up by the development of just Coopertown. So until that decision is made, right now it would be just the developers based on the current policy.
So when that decision is made and the financing is clear, will that be picked up by all of the 235K as well as 300K, or just the 300K developers?
Through your Worship, I believe it would just be the 300K.
Okay. And does Coopertown, are they aware of this shortfall and that may be for them to pick up?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your Worship, my understanding is that other developers within that area are aware of this.
And you haven't heard from any of them? Any negative comments from any of them?
I have not spoken with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. Definitely in support of this, but I'm a little leery on some of the questions and things that went on about transit, first off. And we look at all new areas, and we never know when they're complete. But do we know what transit's going to look like in 3 years in Greens on Gardner, Harbor Landing, West Hill, Fairways West? Do we know what we're going to have to do for those people that live there 3 years from now in terms of efficient service?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your Worship, I'll have to defer that to Mr. Looning.
Mr. Looning.
Through the Mayor, for the future and planned neighborhoods, we do have plans in place for what transit would look like for those areas.
So this would not be part of a look down the road type of thing? If all of a sudden Somerset decides we need transit and we haven't even started digging there and it's going to be 2 or 3 years down the road probably, have we got a transit plan for them already?
Mr. Looning?
Through you, the Mayor. Yes, we have plans for all those developed areas or to be developed areas.
Okay. So if we run a bus down Courtney and we're talking 2 to 3 years from now, because they're, as the delegation said, it's going to take at least 2 years for even one resident to live there. To get 500 residents living there, like Hawkstone, we still don't have transit for Hawkstone, and it's been 3 years in the making, but we're not going to put transit into a system or into an area until there's a full-out need. So we could be talking 5, 6 years for Rosewood before they actually need a bus to come into their development, because it's going to be at least, I think, another 2 years before we get a bus into Hawkstone, and it's 3 years or 4 years in development already. Is that correct?
Mr. Looning?
Through you, the Mayor. That's correct. Many developments that we have in the city right now are a few years away before we have any type of bus service in those areas.
Thanks. I'll leave that one alone. But I guess what I see here is that we talk about, and I go way back to when Maple Ridge started up. Maple Ridge was, everybody joked about it and said, well, if you want to go to Lumsden, you might as well go to Maple Ridge. It's the same distance. But Maple Ridge was a part of the city. Rosewood Alliance Church has been part of the city. Yes, it's on the other side of Courtney, like 200 feet, but it's there. It's a chunk of land that's, being developed, and unfortunately, the whole Coopertown thing didn't quite make it. So we are making an exception. I'm okay with making this type of an exception because of what it does. I was all in favor of Pastor Weeks until he said soccer is predominant and not hockey, but I'll let that one go. But when we talk about with this area, if we look at all the different areas in the city, and I agree with Councillor Hawkins, we don't have a lot of complete communities outside the Ring Road. If you think of Somerset, Hawkstone, Lakeridge is still being built out. Lakewood is finished. Skyview is open. West Hill, Fairways West, they're not all complete. The only complete communities, and even in fact, even the inner city communities, aren't complete because we're knocking down and rebuilding. So are we ever a complete city when it comes to those types of terminologies? I don't think so. We're always growing. So that's always a good thing that I like to see, because when you talk about time of the completeness, you know, people complete their house, but now all of a sudden you're doing rentals, and you're doing rentals. So the city's always changing, and it's expanding. And if we can do this in small doses and be a minimal cost to the city, if there's even going to be a cost, which it doesn't sound like there will be, because the developer and the church are going to front and pay for a lot of the upgrades to make it and start. And the best thing I can say is, how do you have a complete neighborhood if you don't start? Tonight we can start with Rosewood, and I'll be in favor of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Councillor Hinks.
Thank you. Obviously, I will be in favor of this development. And when you look at the OCC, of course, it's not exactly what we're looking for, but sometimes as leaders in the community, everything isn't carved in stone, and we have very few opportunities to take up on projects like this. I mean, this is a special deal, providing 90 attainable houses right off the bat. I mean, some of the people that were here delegating against the attainable houses were people that were delegating for them just a few short months ago. It's kind of hypocritical. But when we talk about things like transit, well, transit is right there, and I'll guarantee you there's some places in Cathedral that don't have transit coming as close as what this place does here. Grocery stores. The Sherwood grocery store is just a few blocks away, probably closer than, say, the middle and north central to the Safeway on 13th Avenue. It's probably closer than that. And also we have doctors, grocery stores, as I said, medical clinics, radiology lab right on the corner of Devonshire and Rochdale, restaurants. This is more of a complete neighborhood than most of the inner city neighborhoods are. So I think it's false to say that this is so far in the middle of nowhere, because it's not. It's got everything you need to supply what's going in as a development here. And I will be supporting it, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hinks. Councillor Fundura.
Thank you, Your Worship. One thing it states is soccer, so hockey is backstage. So I enjoy the idea about soccer. It kind of gives our young kids a place to hang their boots and another floor. So that's one thing. Seniors complex. But there was a comment made about paratransit. I'd like to kind of flesh it out a little bit more to hear. There's going to be a little bit more of a impact on paratransit if this in 2-3 years. So my question would be, how big of an impact, percentage-wise? I mean, that's a kind of big question to Your Worship. Impact on a paratransit.
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, I'll defer that to Mr. Looning.
Mr. Looning?
Through you, the Mayor. It's hard to quantify that exactly, the percentage. Again, there wouldn't be a cost increase, but what we can expect because of the type of housing that is out there, we can anticipate that there's going to be more trips needed by paratransit to that destination. So all I can say at this moment is that the amount of trips will increase, so that may adversely affect the amount of trips we can accommodate within the city as a whole.
Thank you for that. And it's just a comment on, as we're moving forward in our budgetary implications and all that, we are looking at our transportation master plans and transit and paratransit. So I'm looking to the future where we're going to have a few extra buses and the extra paratransit buses that is not going to be that big of an impact in my mind as we're moving forward. So I like the idea of what's happening in that end of town. It is inside the city. Transit is not that far. I mean, most of us will walk sometimes 5-6 blocks to catch a bus. This way, we do have a transit out there, and I mean, it gives us an idea what's coming into the future. Another thing, what I've noticed is the developers are going to be going out there in Coopertown. I don't see too many that really are harshly opposing. So you see some of the hardships maybe putting onto the developers, yes. But I think as how everybody plays nice in the sandbox, I think that will work itself out. So I'm thinking it's a positive move. I know that we, as a council, we need to look at further ahead. We're going to need to think about 20, 30 years or more, even 50, 100 years we should be thinking. So what's happening in front of us here is a small little package that's going to start up that area, and I'm looking forward to seeing it go, so I'm supporting that. Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Federa. We have Councillor O'Donnell, Murray, and then Burnett. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. I very much appreciate when people come before us who have a lot of passion for what they're trying to do, and I want to compliment not only Rosewood Alliance, but the people that are their partners. I said to you back in June that the biggest decision that we're going to make as a council in this term is not going to be a stadium or wastewater treatment plant. It's going to be how we handle SAFs and interim financing in that part. That's the largest financial concern I have. I'm going to refer to our official community plan first. Community priority, achieve long-term financial viability. Section B, financial policies, goal number 3, ensure the sustainability of the city by an understanding and planning for the full cost, capital investments, programs, and services in advance of development approval and capital procurement. Section E, realizing the plan, goal number 5, support orderly and sustainable long-term growth. Policy 14.9, develop a detailed phasing and financing plan that will establish sequencing of new growth and development, and it goes on from there. Those are my priorities. I think that I'm concerned about the message that we're sending. Back in June, after I thought was a very good debate, we turned our staff back and said, go back to the development community, and you must look at interim financing and the long-term costs, and you must do so together. We had developers come before us who said, I get it, you're denying me, but I think it makes sense. And so when I said to you the last time at Executive, I don't like exceptions, it's because of the message that we're sending. If this goes through, and if I was one of the developers in the denied area, I would be at that podium at the next meeting saying, excuse me, I can do some attainable housing. I know that there's a land need for seniors and so on. What I'm looking at today for us is I'm not agreeing to a seniors housing. I'm not agreeing to recreation. I'm not agreeing to any housing. I'm only allowing or not allowing permission for somebody to develop at this time. That's what I'm against. I'm not against seniors. I'm not against recreation. But I am concerned about my side of the city. I want to walk you through it. In the south is Harbor Landing, but we've agreed already that they can develop another 120 hectares of land. Approximately, to me, that's another 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 people. They have permission to do that. West Terra is down the way in terms of public engagement. It has not become before planning, nor you, but that's another 7,000 people. Northridge has a small development that was denied, and they were one of the ones that said, I get it. Then there is Coopertown, which, by the way, I have not seen. I don't know anything about Coopertown. What I can tell you that I saw is that they've scraped some ground, and it's an awful long way from where the church and so on sits. Go have a look. They've scraped it in preparation, but we said, not yet. I don't know when yet is, so I'm not going to assume that it's a year from now or 2 years from now. I'm concerned about the dollars and cents, because in my side of the city, we are deficient in terms of roads. Staff have done a nice job of talking about Courtney. Okay, I get it. Courtney's only one road. Pinky Road. There is no way to get people out to some of these places in terms of as it starts to develop. We have to look at a serious road network. Therefore, every dollar counts. I'm concerned about the message that we're sending to the development community and to all the people that sat in all those OCP meetings and said, here's our priorities. Please, please follow what we said. We have enthusiastically stood here and said, good for the OCP, great for awards. But by the way, tonight I'm going to look at an exception because, we could do that. I can't do that. I have nothing against what they're doing. In fact, I applaud them. But it's the timing and it's the cost. And I do not want to look at anybody else in another area subsidizing any other development. Do you not recall that the developer said to us, by the way, we have trouble collecting sometimes? That's not the issue here, I don't believe. But does that mean that this attainable housing is better than the other attainable housing that might be over on my side of the city? Does this mean that we should subsidize this so that they don't have to do attainable housing? What's the message? I'm very confused. But I like it when we have a big picture and long-term view. Not in favor of exceptions.
Thank you, Councilor O'Donnell. Councilor Murray?
Thanks very much, Your Worship. In the report, we have Appendix B, and nobody's really gone to Appendix B. I know it's been mentioned a little bit, but there's a number of conditions for this development to actually occur. In Appendix B, 7 of them, all privately owned recreation facilities shall be located adjacent to the future zone park level and not to compete with the urban growth. And it goes on. The second part, the developer shall submit a pro forma to the development to the city to demonstrate the proposed land uses are identified and viable and that they could proceed as described. 3, the developer of Rosewood lands shall be required to fund all water, wastewater, and stormwater projects required for the development with no reimbursement from the city. 4, the developer of Rosewood Park shall be required to own, operate, maintain, and decommission any required interim servicing agreements, including obtaining land control and regulatory approvals. Your Worship, it goes on and on, talking about pumping stations, lift station, the electrical forced main that comes through. There's a tremendous amount of responsibility put onto the developers to actually make this happen. So my question to the administration, if these conditions for approval aren't met, does that mean that the development doesn't go through?
Ms. Horlock?
Through you, Your Worship, as we're moving forward with the concept planning and doing the servicing agreement fee, these things are going to come into consideration as we're moving forward, so they will have to be adhered to.
Your Worship, it seems to me that this group has taken on a pretty significant project. If they're willing to go through all of this, I believe it's the right thing to do. And I appreciate that we have organized systems in place. We have a structured system that the city operates within. And it's important that we have the ability to be flexible. Now, I appreciate that this early into our new system, we need to find flexibility. But I think that shows the leadership, the political will, and the political leadership that says, in some cases, there may be a place that we may need to modify. Doesn't necessarily mean that becomes the standard operation or the way that we're going to start doing business every day. But if it's the right thing to do, I'll stand up and I'll admit that it's the right thing to do. It's the right time. In this case, I believe this is the right time. Your Worship, I'm happy to follow through on what executive's recommendations were. The executive, with a significant number of us, chose to move forward on this project to see this happen. Again, because we believe it's the right thing to do. And I'll stand behind that decision that I made before. Again, Your Worship, I wait till the last minute to make up my decision, but so far I feel very confident. The developers made great strides on their side, taken on huge commitments in order to make this happen. So, Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Councilor Burnett.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too, when I first read through, was feeling very uncomfortable about violating some of the new guidelines and rules we've set in place for the OCP, because once you make one exception, then how do you control the floodgates? But I think what caught my attention in this particular proposal was much more the nature of the partnership. I'm going to date myself here, but I go back in my university days, there's an economist named Peter Drucker that talked about a three-legged stool about the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector needing to come together to address a lot of these social needs. And when Pastor Weeks was talking about his initial vision was to address a lot of these community needs, in terms of the continuum care, the affordable housing, the recreation. What I'm most interested in is once you form that partnership, what's the potential for the Rosewood Alliance to help contribute to further needs within that community? Because there's going to be groups of kids probably that need some soccer equipment. There's going to be seniors that need some kind of special care. There's going to be others. And while this proposal doesn't get into that level of sort of detail and grind, I do think that there's a lot more power in this kind of capacity, because the nature of, I think, the Rosewood participation from a nonprofit point of view, I think, brings a powerful connection into this kind of model, because there is a layer where it seems government can't give enough, the private sector can't make it work on their own to make it affordable, but somehow maybe creatively all three can come up with creative solutions. So it's that factor that I think is giving me that wiggle room to sort of violate our OCP and look at supporting this particular proposal. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Burnett. Councilor Mayor, could you take the chair, please?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I rise in concurrence with the recommendation from the Executive Committee. I want to explain why. I want to go back to the notion that we had asked for several questions to be asked and were answered by the administration. And I thought long and hard about this. I mean, this is not like most developments. This is a bit unorthodox. It is different, but it is no different than what we actually dealt with in Harbor Landing when we had a study area in Harbor Landing. Now, at one point, we were not going to allow that to go forward because of its impact on SAFs, and that still remains, that as long as they can demonstrate that Harbor Landing West will be not have an impact, it's okay. So we have conditions going forward. I've heard members of council talk about this being violating the OCP or at odds with the OCP. It is not in violation of the OCP. This is part of Coopertown. In fact, Coopertown talked about this group working together to develop the area. So it's important to remember that. We talked about orderly, sustainable growth. That's what this is. Our priority is attainable low-income housing. We look at recreation and other things. But again, that doesn't violate in any way the terms or understanding or spirit or letter of the OCP. I'll say that all day. For me, the issue of a complete neighborhood has been said by members of council. I want to repeat that. No development when it starts is a complete neighborhood. So how can we impose that? Let's be careful we don't impose rules, regulations, or impose different things on one developer that hits another one. That wouldn't be fair either. For me, this is an easy approach. It is part of Coopertown. It is an exception to the extent of the SAFs that are being charged. But everyone knows that this is part of Coopertown. There's nothing new here. It's very much in keeping of our planning procedures, of our OCP. I have no issue with that at all. I want to talk for a moment about the $3 million. That's supposing that the final phasing and financing agrees with the infrastructure to be put forward. And right now we're asking the industry, do we need this infrastructure? What's your opinion on that? It may well be that it's not $3 million. It could be less than $3 million. It could be more, but I don't think this number is firm. So to confirm this with the administration, we've asked the building industry to review our infrastructure needs for the next several years to be clear on what's required in the future. That information is not back yet, and so we don't know the final result of what infrastructure is going to be needed, whether there's interchanges or whatever. Is that correct? Through you, Mr. Chair?
To you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. We'll be going through that exercise during the next year as we talk to the development community.
Many of the developers said that we may be heavy on infrastructure. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that the number $3 million is not the final number. And do we need that infrastructure? We'll find that out through a lot of negotiation. I won't repeat what we said in transit. Transit's to the door of that development. Let's not impose any more requirements on this development than we do any other one, because there are many that still don't have transit to this day, and we consider them to be a complete neighborhood. I support this recommendation. I think it's good for the city. It meets our social policy objectives of attainable housing. It is totally in keeping with our Fisher Community plan. It will be part of a complete neighborhood when we see Coopertown develop very shortly into the future. No trouble supporting this, and I ask members of council to support this. It is not an exception. We are not compromising our principles at all. In fact, we are affirming them. Part of what we're supposed to do here is to respond to how our city wants to go by those who build the city for us, because we don't build the city. Other people do. So we recognize we have an opportunity to meet our objectives here that does not offend Coopertown's development or the OCP. I say we should do it. on voting for it. Thank you. Councillor Bryce, Councillor Burnett, do you want to close debate? Okay, we've all spoken, so I'll call a question on this report. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll move on to our next report, CR 14-116. This is municipal heritage properties. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks. So this is from Planning Commission as well. Delegation of authority to approve alterations, that's a key word, to designated municipal heritage properties. There are 91 designated properties. All of them became designated by bylaw, but in order to handle alterations, we are suggesting and looking for concurrence that this be delegated to administration. May I have a seconder on the motion?
Seconder, please. Councillor Murray. Okay.
Looking for concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Comments or questions on this report? Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Pardon me. I had a chance to look at Section 3 of the Municipal Heritage Act. Just want to confirm that we're talking about minor alterations here. You know, if a property were to have something that affected the heritage character and nature of a building, or if the building were to be removed, can someone just confirm to me that this doesn't apply to that those bigger issues would still have to come before council?
Ms. Horlock?
Through your worship, yes, it is to ensure just minor alterations that don't impact the character or the defining heritage elements.
Okay, thanks. And one other question: who's the gauge of that? Who gets to decide what's major and what's minor?
Through your worship, it does fall within my area. So we have a heritage officer that would look at those items, and we would do an analysis of that. And I guess if there was some questions, we may take it forward to the Heritage Advisory Committee to get their advice.
Okay, thank you. I feel that's fairly clearly laid out in the Act, so I look forward to supporting this motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Other questions on this report? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have a bylaw.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move, seconded by Councillor Fraser, the bylaw 2014-77 be introduced and read the first time.
All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Fundura, the bylaw 2014-77 be read a second time.
Any comments or questions on this? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Hawkins, that Council hereby consent to bylaw 2014-77 going to third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously.
And then I move, seconded by Councillor Hinks, that bylaw number 2014-77 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Finance and Administration Committee. Councilor Murray.
Thanks, Your Worship. I rise to bring forward CR 14-117. This is the tax enforcement application title for 2014 liens. If I can have a seconder, Your Worship.
Seconder, please. Councilor Bryce.
Thanks, Councillor Bryce. Your Worship, the report's pretty straightforward, that the manager of property taxation be authorized to proceed with tax enforcement proceedings and serve a 6-month notice to all those parcels of land included in the list of lands marked in Appendix A. So, Your Worship, I just ask that you confirm the recommendations coming from the F&A. Thank you. Finance Administration Committee.
Thank you. Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. I'm noticing that this list is getting shorter and shorter every year. What are we doing differently to ensure that taxes are being paid?
Mr. Archer or Ms. Harlock?
Sorry, through you, Your Worship, I'll defer that to Mr. Barr.
Through Your Worship, there's a number of steps that are required by the Tax Enforcement Act, and we follow each of those. It includes many different types of notification, and beyond that, we go beyond what's required by legislation and make many more contacts with the property owners, provide many options for them to pay off their taxes, and also encourage them to enroll in the TIPS program so that they can avoid being in tax enforcement in the future.
Great. I'm very happy to hear that. Nobody wants to see somebody lose their home, but we also need money in order to run the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Other comments on this report? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Information report from the Executive Committee on the Regina Wastewater Treatment Plant value for money. A motion for that? Okay. This is receive and file. A seconder, please. Seconder. Okay. Any comments or questions on this? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, please.
Second, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great evening.